Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host and head witch, Miss Solaris BlueRaven at the helm this evening. I want to give a shout-out to everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, producers, listeners, chat room, and thank everybody for tuning in tonight. We are 100% listener-supported, so if you like what you're hearing, please click on the donate button. We appreciate your support, and thank you for any contribution you can make to this excellent station. And there is a Mind Control Summit coming up late May 30th, 31st, and June 1st in Las Vegas, Nevada. You can purchase tickets at www.supersoldiersummit.com. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, of course, and I will be there presenting as well, so purchase a ticket and come on down. And you are listening to Studio A. And my special guest this evening is Henry Kroll. Henry Kroll's expertise is in collaborating studies of biology, physics, and stellar orbit to make science publications. He attributes his success to his ability to combine and interpret data. He is the author of Cosmological Ice Ages, where he addresses the greatest mysteries of all time. Henry has authored 6 other books and has worked on the ionosphere research burst transmitter at Fairbanks. He has done commercial fishing and has been a guest on Coast to Coast and The Kevin Smith Show. His websites are guarddogbooks.com and alaskapublishing.com. And Henry is currently promoting 2 small books about his parents, one of which is called Mad Trapper of Alaska, about his father and his mother, who was a public health nurse for the town of Seldovia, Homer, Anchor Point, and Kenai from 1937 to 1944. And please welcome Henry to the show this evening. Henry, how are you doing?
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. I'm a little bit tired because we put in a pretty full day's work already. We're working on our boat to get it ready to go fishing this summer to transport salmon.
Wow, that sounds pretty interesting. I bet it was a long day for you guys over there. So how is the fishing going out there right now?
Well, our season doesn't start until the middle of June, but I have 2 barges to tow over to the other side of the inlet. And we had earthquakes this morning. We had how many earthquakes? We had about 24 earthquakes here in the middle of Cook Inlet, the epicenter. One of them was in the 5, Richter scale 5. So I don't know what's going to happen here.
That's pretty unusual. Is that pretty unusual for that area right now or no?
We don't have that many earthquakes, and we've had about a dozen or so just within the last 24 hours.
That's very strange. And is there fracking going on close by or anything like that?
No, there's nothing like that here, but there's a lot of oil wells out in the inlet. But the epicenter is somewhere between Anchor Point and the other side of the inlet, the west side. It's about 20 miles off from Anchor Point, which is near Homer.
That's really interesting.
And, anyway, I transport salmon. It's called tendering, and we carry ice and all kinds of supplies and dog food and everything for the people on the west side of the Cook Inlet. And we provide that service. And then I have a setnet site over there where we catch salmon, and my wife and my son fishes that, and my daughter. And I have 11 grandkids and 5 kids. And 2 of them are helping me out on the fish sites here, or fish on the boat. But anyway, I'd like to talk about the books. I got 2 that I wrote recently, and they're very small, easy to read. There's about 100 pages with lots of pictures. One is on my father, the Mad Trapper of Alaska. He was a very unusual character. He was in trouble in school, and he beat up on a bully there, and he had to leave home because he wasn't treated right. And he ran away from home at age 8, and it was adopted by the Nez Perce Indians. And they took him over to Oregon, near Pendleton, Oregon, a place called Mackay Creek, Oregon. And he lived with them 10 years, but he also worked in the logging camps, and he built himself up. He was a very strong man, of German descent, but he spoke some German when he left home, and English and Nez Perce Indian. Then he picked up several other languages in the logging camps to where he could converse with the Swedes and the Norwegians and some Finnish. And then later on, when in his 50s, he studied Spanish, started memorizing the dictionary, and he made several trips to Cuba. And he was there when Batista was, the revolution was going on. Castro was going to take over Cuba, and he had to leave there. His brother was buying tobacco there in Cuba. He would make cigars out of the Cuban tobacco. But anyway, my mother delivered approximately 200 babies. She graduated. She was from the New York region, Finger Lake region in New York, and she graduated college there and then got a scholarship to do work in midwifery in Edinburgh Castle. They have a place to train nurses for midwifery in Scotland. And then she worked for the Frontier Nursing Service in Kentucky, delivering babies, and also administering vaccines and different public health things. And apparently they sent nurses all over the world to looks like about 70 countries in the map that's in the book there. And she saw this little ad in a newspaper where they needed a public health nurse after she worked there a few years. She needed a public health nurse in Alaska, and she applied for the job, and then to her surprise, she got the position, and she came in on the steamboat into Seldovia, Alaska. And that was the headquarters for all of the freight that came into this section of Alaska at the time. Anchorage didn't exist too much, in that time, but all of the freight and groceries and things were transported to other ports with smaller boats, but the steamship had to come in here because climate was cold. There was a lot of ice up at Anchorage in the winters. So anyway, she met the outgoing nurse, and she inherited her cat and her boyfriend, and then they lived together there. And during December 7th, 1942, they were in an apartment building, and they turned on the radio, and they heard the Radio Honolulu, Hawaii, the broadcast. The Japanese were dropping bombs on Honolulu at that time, and they were the first ones to know about it in the town of Seldovia, and they told the mayor, and Jack and Susan English lived below them. They were the postmasters. But anyway, it's an interesting story, and for people, human interest story. Now, she played the piano quite well. Her sister had lessons, but she never had any lessons. She would listen to her sister play and then be able to do the same thing, only better, without having the lessons. So that was kind of interesting. And then my dad, he played the banjo, and then he also played the piano some, and he taught himself the saxophone over a period of 6 months. And he played professionally in Seattle and also in Anchorage, and played the banjo and the guitar and the mandolin and the violin. My father was famous for catching 3 live wolverines and selling them to Doc Chase in Cordova for zoos in Seattle and other places. And they paid him $900 a piece for those live wolverines. And he bought a small airplane. And he flew it to Alaska after taking 1 flying lesson. He gave rides to get gasoline. And then he worked with Bob Reeves, who later on started Revolution Airlines. And they hired this kid. He was only 16 years old, by the name of Bill Egan. He tied a rope around his waist, and they had him pushing the dynamite out of the plane for the mines. In Valdez, there was mines, gold mines, on the top of the mountains all around the area, and they needed dynamite, so go ahead.
Wow, that's pretty wild. And so what guided you to write about your parents? I mean, was it just something you wanted to do on a historical level for them, or?
Well, I've been wanting to write about them for more than about 25 years. My father passed away in 1969, and my mother passed in 1986. And I thought it was just time before I pass away myself. I'm 70 years old. And, I just thought it'd be more, people talk about them, and they're living legends in this area. I get a lot of questions. When are you going to write the book about your father, and get that question all the time. So I thought I'd just keep it simple, and it's 100 pages, lots of pictures, and I've got it on my website where you can review it, and they were exceptional people. They did amazing things, and my father came out of the Depression where people had to work really hard. They worked 24-hour days to survive. If they wanted to get ahead, they'd work 2 or 3 12-hour shifts, something like that, or 36 hours, and he'd sleep 12 hours and work another 36 hours. That's unheard of today.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Well, I think anyway, I do the thing, myself, I was brought up that way, and we go at things hammer and tongs. It's like a battle, like you're in a fight with somebody, and you got to win, or you're going to die.
Right.
And that's the way we do things up here, and I was born and raised that way. And I worked with my father, and I fished king crab for 20 years, and my pots weighed 650 pounds. Some of them weighed 900 pounds.
Wow.
And they had big ropes and buoys in there, and we'd push them around on the deck and bait them up. And a lot of times, you're running in total zero visibility. It's raining and foggy, and you got to find these strings of pots out there in the middle of nowhere. And it's rough, too,
Mm-hmm.
I had a 72-foot boat when I was fishing Lower Cook Inlet for 10, 20 years. And I put in about 3 million pounds of king crab during that time altogether. We'd catch about 196,000 pounds in 3 weeks in the summertime. And then I'd start fishing in the fall in November for tanner crab, and then king crab again in February in the spring. And we did that for a long time, and crabs, sort of disappeared. I could never figure out what the cause was. So I kept fishing further south and fished Kodiak. They had a 14 million pound quota over there. I fished there 3 or 4 years, and then I kept running south of Kodiak 12 hours or 24-hour run down to this little bay down there, and we hide in there for the weather. And we fished Nunavutchak Bay and Port Wrangell, where I anchored up. And there was waterfall there. We could get water, so we didn't have to go back to town to get water. We'd fill our water tanks and take showers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful place, but eventually the crab disappeared there too, So and I was working on a false path in King Cove. And that's when I started thinking, after we lost the boat and lost all the pots and $1 million worth of gear, that there's something going on with the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized all these oil tankers coming in here, they were bringing in 2 oil tankers a day, and each one carries 10 to 20 million gallons of water, and they take it out of the Los Angeles harbor and dump it in up here. And to take on oil, they have to have ballast water to run in the open ocean, otherwise those big ships will flip over.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pumping this water. It comes from Honolulu Boat Harbor and Korea and Japan and Anacortes, Washington, and Los Angeles. And they bring these foreign organisms up here, and it changes the ecosystem around where nothing can survive. Everything is different. You've got different flora and fauna, zooplankton and plant plankton, phytoplankton. And then the fish can't eat that foreign stuff, and the shrimp die, and the bivalves were affected first. The clams on the beaches in Seldovia, there's oxygen was consumed. There's nothing but algae there.
Wow.
But anyway, let's get off of that topic. It's too depressing. It cost me millions of dollars. And
well, it's very interesting nonetheless, though. I appreciate you talking about that a little bit. And I do think that it's important to maintain some kind of a diary or documentation of your parents for everybody. I think that's a wonderful thing that you did. So I hope everybody checks that book out. And is it one book or two that you wrote about for your parents?
Well, it's 2 books. One of them is called The Mad Trapper of Alaska. The other is Alaska Frontier Nurse. And you can see the covers on my website, alaskapublishing.com, and there's a little description of each book,
That's great.
And the other website I have is guarddogBooks.com. And anyway, I wrote several books prior to that time because I was interested in how things work. And I wrote one on the Iraq War and got it published before we invaded Iraq, and it's called Sand Pirates. And the original title was Saddam Hussein and the Sand Pirates, but the Sand Pirates are the people that go over there for the resources that are there, not the people who live there. And it's the oil people, that or whoever wants whatever they got. We go invade these foreign countries, not because of the politics, because we need the resources. And it has to do with our educational system in this country, I believe. Mm-hmm. The school curriculums are picked by people that were picked also by the Rockefeller foundations. They also pick the people or the types of health care that you get. Mm-hmm. The Rockefeller Foundation has a hand in these things. They pull strings from behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And I likened it to one of Ayn Rand's things that she used in one of her books, How the Educational System Works. She used a word called cappuccino. It has nothing to do with a coffee drink. It's cappuccino. Back in the 1800s, they would encase children in clay jugs that were off weird shaped, and they would feed them until they grew up into the shape of the jug, and then they could break the jug and exhibit them in circuses because they were weird shaped people.
Wow.
And that's what they do to our children in the schools, but it has to do with their minds.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Go ahead.
So this is... Go ahead.
No, I'm just continuing. No, I was just agreeing with you. I agree with that. Totally.
Well, yeah, and then I wrote The Frog is Cooked, which over a period of 5 or 6 years, people kept sending me horrendous things of what's going on, and I put it all together in sort of a compendium, and it's got a couple of good jokes in it, and I get compliments from people who actually read it. And then I was compelled to write Cosmological Ice Ages because I wanted to know how the climate works on this planet. Mm-hmm. And I've been to a few colleges, and I've read and studied Scientific American for 25 years or more. And, I have a lot of books at home on astronomy and space and that sort of thing, and I've read and studied most of my life. And things sort of just came together, and I just kept adding information together, and by using just ordinary common sense and available data, I made some amazing discoveries by writing the book and doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
First, I wanted to know where we're going in space and how, where we came from. Where was the sun born? These are basic questions, but nobody seems to know the answer. And
right.
So I came across two guys that tally up the redshift at 2,149 nearby bright stars. Their names are Campbell and Moore, and they determined that we were heading toward Hercules at 19.5 kilometers per second. Not being an astronomer, I'm not really familiar with Hercules, but it's kind of to the northwest sometimes of the year. And I drew a line from Hercules through the center of the star map, if you lay down on the ground what you see up in the sky there, mm-hmm. and extended it out backwards and winds up in Orion.
Mm.
Well, you don't suppose all these monuments pointing at Orion all around the world, that these ancient peoples knew this already? Mm-hmm. There's the Egyptian pyramids and everywhere, and Sirius. Well, Sirius is a little bit below Orion in the sky, and it's the brightest star in the sky. And it's one of the closest ones to us, and it's very large compared with the Centauri group, which is 4 light years. But Sirius A and B is 8 light years away, and we're heading toward it at 7.5 kilometers a second, which is the opposite direction from Hercules. So actually, this cluster of 100 stars that we live in, it's called a moving group. We live in 100 stars, and they're gravitationally ruled by the biggest ones in the group, and it's not our sun. The 2 biggest ones are Sirius A and B and Procyon A and B. Both of these stars have small white dwarfs orbiting them. There could be planets around the Sirius system, but there's so much light in the area we can't see the planets. But there's such a wobble of the Sirius B around Sirius A that there could very well be an inhabited planet there. But what our astronomers don't realize, or a lot of the scientists, they don't seem to get, is that Sirius B, it puts out 100 times the ultraviolet light of our sun.
Mm-hmm.
And, the sun could not possibly make the carbon resources that we have on this planet. We've got layers of coal 100 feet thick that were made during the Carboniferous era, which was about 350 million years ago. And we've got limestone layers that were made during that era in the shallow seas that are 12,500 feet thick, some places. And the limestone is made by plants called coccolithophores and fortifera and crinoids and glabogina. There's different types of shells that make limestone. But the continental United States, from the Carolinas all the way to the Rocky Mountains, is limestone with an average thickness of 3,500 feet thick.
Mm-hmm.
And that was made by photosynthesis. It had to be made by light. It came from somewhere. But the atmosphere on Earth was much thicker than it is today, so you would never see the sun in such an atmosphere. During the dinosaur era, which wasn't that far back compared to the Carboniferous, it was atmosphere they think was around 60 pounds per square inch, between 30 and 60, 140 million years ago. Right now it's 14.5 at sea level, and it's only 50 miles deep. And so basically, when life first got started, it could have been as much as 700 pounds per square inch and 20% carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
All that carbon was laid down as coal, oil, and limestone. In order to do that, it required light and plant growth, photosynthesis in the right frequency, and the sun could never pierce the atmosphere because, to begin with, the atmosphere was 2,800 miles deep. And you'd never see the sun. But around Iraq on the roads, there's these ancient stone monuments, and they show two suns in the sky, or two objects, and a moon up there. So maybe they knew that we're in orbit around Sirius. And then you've got the Dogon tribe in Africa, near Timbuktu in the middle of nowhere in Africa. They have all kinds of scientific data about Sirius A and Sirius B and possibly a Sirius C, third object around there.
Mm-hmm.
Years and years, back in 1910, years before we even knew there was a Sirius B. Science didn't discover it until 1982 or something like that. But anyway, we've known all this stuff eons ago, many 1,000 years ago. The ancient people knew all of this stuff. I just had to rediscover it. And what this means to people, we lose them at this point. They don't understand what we're talking about. But when you're driving your car down the road, that energy you're combining with oxygen to make your car move did not come from the sun, because the sun could never pierce the atmosphere. In ancient times, to make that oil, or that coal, or whatever, the limestone or the natural gas, because the atmosphere was thousands of miles deep, it took something like Sirius B to pierce the atmosphere. So what I did is I started plotting a course through space like you would on a boat or a plane. I also fly, so I've got quite 100 hours in light aircraft, and I can fly on instruments, no problem.
Sure.
Because I'm so used to driving a boat in zero visibility, so I figured somebody should figure this out, So we're leaving Orion at 19.5 kilometers a second, and it's upstream in the galactic arm. This galaxy is 100,000 light years in diameter, and Orion's only about 1,200, 1,300 light years distance. It's a star-making factory. You can see new stars coming out of there, and the cover of the book shows lots of stars in the dust clouds there, like our sun or bigger, coming out of Orion.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, we left Orion because the galaxy's rotating faster than it can hang on to its stars. They know this. They've told us this in Astronomy Magazine. They say a lot of things in Astronomy Magazine. They say that our galaxy's eaten up 10 major-sized galaxies. They gobble up one another like Pac-Man. And they say also about 6 years ago, I think, it was eating up 100,000 star clusters, and each one of those clusters could have thousands of stars. And it adds and gets bigger and bigger, and we are heading toward Andromeda in a few billion years. We're going to eat Andromeda also. And at first they thought Andromeda was the same size as our galaxy, but now they think that ours is even bigger than Andromeda. But getting back to the point here where I was concerned about the local group and how this would affect the climate on Earth and where this stuff came from. Where did this coal come from? How was it possibly made? You know, did God make it all? Did God just snap his fingers and make all this oil? Well, that's a little bit of simplistic answer, because it was made by diatoms, or plants in the oceans that use photosynthesis. They use non-cyclic photosynthesis. About 20% of the organisms on this planet use cyclic photosynthesis, which the plants will charge up an electron and use the energy to make ATP, an energy carrier for foods and sugars and starches. Then they throw it away. Well, in non-cyclic photosynthesis, they can make 8 times more ATP and 10 times more sugars and starches by saving these charged electrons for up to a year in hydrogen bond membranes within the cell. But anyway, that's what makes your car move and heats your home and heats your office. Natural gas, all that stuff is made by non-cyclic photosynthesis. Somebody invented that about 700 million years ago. And maybe it evolved naturally. I don't know. There's a lot of arguments there. You can go either way. But I don't want to get into the religious aspect of it. I'm just trying to stick with what I know and what's available data. And I'm not asking anybody to believe anything I say. I wish you would check it out yourself. What I'm about to tell you, you probably won't agree with, and you probably won't believe it at all, but you just got to look it up and check it out. And, you know, this global warming thing that we keep hearing about, or climate change, it's basically the globalist agenda to enslave everybody on the planet by making them work harder and pay more of the goods and services and labor to them. They want to turn the entire planet into a slave colony.
Yep.
And we work hard for a living up here, and we earn the original dollar. We go out and catch the fish or mine the gold or harvest the coal or something. We got to have resources in order to earn the original dollar. So this agenda that they have has nothing to do with any kind of reality. It basically, I wish everybody looked this up. The carbon dioxide content of our atmosphere is 0.033%. It's a trace gas, and it has nothing to do with the climate, or very little anyway. And you need it to grow food for people to eat. And that's a third of 1% of the atmosphere, while oxygen is around 20 to 22%, and nitrogen is 78%. Now, somehow we could double the amount of CO2 by releasing it from burning coal or something. It would be 0.066% of our atmosphere, and it would still be a trace gas at about 2/3 of 1%. Now, this is available everywhere, but everybody thinks that CO2 is a very plentiful greenhouse gas, you know, and it really causes havoc to the climate, makes it warm. Well, there's another little thing about that, too, that water vapor is 100 times more effective greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, because there's more of it, for one thing. That's on a clear day. But when it's raining and it's 100% humidity, water vapor is about 1,000% more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Now, you can look that up, too. You don't have to take my word for anything here. You got to look it up.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to believe this stuff that they keep hammering at us all the time. But every time a big volcano goes off, it releases CO2 in massive quantities and lots of dust, and it lowers global temperature from 1 to 2 degrees. Well, when Al Gore was touring the country with his hockey stick graph of global temperatures there, the Icelandic volcanoes went off, and it lowered it back down to the average global temperature to 32 degrees. And that has been that way for about 3 million years. I have a temperature graph. It came out of a Time Life book. It's a logarithmic thing, so it's about 6 feet long, and I couldn't put it into my book. It's copyright for one thing. But apparently during the Carboniferous era, the global temperature went up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's been around 63 degrees Fahrenheit from the beginning when life got started on the planet. Then prior to that, we were in a Huronian glaciation where it was 150 below zero for 1 billion years. So what happened is the sun was born in Orion, and the planets were formed, and we drifted out of there, and Earth went into an ice age because space is cold, and it had a thick atmosphere, and there was no way for the sun to heat it up because the atmosphere was very thick, and the sun didn't only burn about 2/3 as hot as it does today. It's slowly increasing its output, but very slowly. And we were in this ice age for 1 billion years. We had a single continent, and we had a 5-mile sheet of ice on the single continent, and the oceans were froze over 1 mile deep for 1 billion years. There could have been some life in the bottom of the sea through volcanic vents, but there wasn't much volcanism. And then all of a sudden, everything warmed up to about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, we drifted out of Orion, and we caught between Procyon and Sirius B is a little object not much bigger than the Earth. It has 1.5 solar masses, and it put us in orbit around Sirius, and the light from Sirius A puts 100 times more light than our sun in the UV spectrum, which plants can utilize, and Sirius A puts out 4 times the light of our sun because it's a 2 solar mass star. I hope I don't lose everybody here, but you know, the mass of Sirius A and B together is 6.8 E30 in kilograms. And the mass of our sun is a 2 with 30 zeros behind it in kilograms. So in other words, it's 3.5 solar masses. And Procyon's sitting over there 4 years light distance. It was probably closer in ancient times. It's also a 3 solar mass star. It's 6.8 E30 or 5.98 if you want to argue about it. So it's 3 solar masses, and it has a white dwarf. And those are the only objects that could have pierced our atmosphere to make these layers of coal, oil, and limestone. And that energy that we use comes from Sirius B primarily. We were in a nice tight orbit around there for a very long time, from about 700 million years ago to about 3 million years ago, and then suddenly the temperature went down to 32 degrees and stayed there, and we got into the ice age cycle, plus or minus 12 degrees. It's a freezing point.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why is we started making elliptical orbits, and Earth started making ice caps for the first time 3 million years ago. And you can correlate this with layers of coal. I've got pictures of the coal in Homer. The layers on top are thinner, and as you go down deeper, they're thicker. So each time we come close to the Sirius system, the light from that system makes the plants grow, and then the glaciers cover everything as we go away from Sirius and compresses it down into coal. So the first ice ages were only a few hundred years, and then maybe 1,000 years, and now we go out to 9 light years, and ice ages last 105,000 years. And we go up to 9 light years and stop. But right now we're at 8 light years. We're heading back at 7.5 kilometers per second towards Sirius, and when we arrive there, we'll lose the ice caps again, and we'll start making another small layer of coal. But the problem is we've lost most of the atmosphere on this planet due to several factors. Mm-hmm. One of them is laid down as coal, oil, and limestone. The other is that the Earth expanded. The Atlantic Ocean was formed about 150 million years ago as the continent suddenly ripped apart. And there's, I was a kid and growing up in Seldovia, I checked this book out in the library written by a guy named Wagner, and he was into continental drift. He was a German. And I checked it out about 3 times, and my parents made fun of me for reading it. I was about 8, 9 years old. Mm-hmm. And now it's generally accepted fact that continents drift, and that open up? Well, the Earth has underground volcanoes in its oceans that turn heavy material into lighter material, which is lava, and these vents split open. Apparently, planets or most of the geologically active planets are like atomic piles. If you can believe that, it's during planet formation, all of the heavy elements like radon and uranium and iridium and thorium, they're thorium reactors. Thorium is a very radioactive element.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of beta radiation and heat. It makes a lot of heat. Well, Earth is primarily a thorium reactor. It's 39th in abundance on this planet. And, it's fairly abundant. That's on the surface, by the way. So we really don't know how much thorium is at the core of this planet. But they say it has an iron core, but, when they bubble away for 1 billion years during planet formation, it could have a lot of other radioactive elements down there, including, thorium and uraniums of different kinds, and lead. Well, lead, the amount of lead on this planet isn't a lot, too. It's more abundant than even thorium. And lead is made by decaying uranium, and it takes longer than the age of the universe to make lead, because that's how long it takes to make lead for uranium to decay.
Mm-hmm.
It takes, let's see, I'm trying to look it up, how much thorium it's more than 14 billion years before thorium becomes non-radioactive. The half-life of thorium, it's half of radiation, it loses half of it in over 14 billion years, which is older than humans. That's another thing, too, Einstein, both Einstein and Stephen Hawking, they said that, in private, that the universe is incredibly old. It's an anthropic state. It just goes on forever, and it makes new elements every time a star explodes. But this Big Bang theory was kind of a joke among physicists, in that nobody can prove it. But they just add a bunch of facts together and try to make it sound like it has validity. Mm-hmm. But originally it was formulated, came up by a Catholic monk, that Dimitri, I guess his name was, and then Edwin Hubble put the math behind it in 1928, and all of the Christian creationists grabbed a hold of it because it made it sound like somebody actually created this stuff out here, but it could be an endless state. It could have been there forever. Mm-hmm. And as far as it's expanding, we have no idea what happens to photons or the redshift after they go through 14 billion years of time to the edge of the universe. And there's still fully formed galaxies out there at that incredible distance. But anyway, the globalists want to put everybody in, make everybody pay this carbon tax, and it has nothing to do with any kind of reality. And, water vapor has all this greenhouse effect more than carbon dioxide, so restricting carbon isn't going to do anything for the climate.
Right.
And volcanoes put out more carbon than humans ever could, and even termites put out more carbon dioxide than humans on this planet. However, it's needed to make oxygen by the plants, and the rainforest and the plankton in the ocean make the oxygen, and we've lost half the plankton in the oceans. We don't know where it went, and half the fish populations are gone. Maybe it's due to overfishing. And then 2/3 of the rainforest have been cut down, and that they make some oxygen. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of in a problem that restricting carbon isn't going to do a thing for it,
I agree.
But the president sign us up to that, it's just incredibly stupid. But most of these planets keep warm by being radioactive at the center. This theory was brought up by some astronomer lady that was looking at the moons of Jupiter, Io, and Callisto, and others, and they thought they were being kept warm by the thorium at the core. And a lot of the moons, Jupiter has 67 moons, but most of them are only 3 kilometers wide or less. And Io is volcanically active, incredibly so, and Europa has oxygen atmosphere. And it has a lot of ice on Europa, which is hydrogen and oxygen, so we don't really know what's releasing the oxygen. Maybe there's some sort of photosynthesis just going on in there underneath the ice. We don't know.
Mm-hmm. That certainly sounds like it. It's quite fascinating nonetheless, and a lot of this material is in your book. Is that right?
Yeah, it's in Cosmological Ice Ages and Planet Formation, and then even how we could go there. I've got several chapters on that. It's actually 2 books. The first 200 pages has to do with a more scientific aspect of it, and then the second book, it's almost 400 pages. The second book has 8.5 by 11, 12 point. It has to do with the more esoteric stuff and how it ties in with the science.
Mm-hmm.
And how we could go to Sirius because of the gravity in that neighborhood. And what we had to do to compute our orbit period around Sirius, we had to figure out the gravity over there. And being that it's 3.5 solar masses, it would have 3.5 times the gravity of our sun. However, you've got the galaxy behind there, and we've got massive black holes that hold this galaxy together with their gravity, and it's transmitted in a big spiral from the center of the galaxy. It's called a Fibonacci spiral. It's based on a mathematical concept. And the gravity is transmitted from star to star, sort of. And Orion just happens to be upstream where our sun was born. So in order to figure gravity, you've got to multiply the mass difference times 4. So 3.5 times 4 is 14 times the gravity of our sun. And then you've got Procyon sitting over there at 10.4 light years. So it's a little further away. It's going to have less gravity, but you still have to you compensate for that. It's easily done because it's a 4 square principle. But anyway, it's about 27 times the gravity of our sun over that way, so in that direction. So to navigate in space, it's sort of like flying a plane. I mean, it's 3-dimensional, but galaxies are like big pancakes. Or every time a star gets kicked out of the big circle, it gets drawn in by the gravity of the other stars combined. So they wind up being big pinwheels, you know. Mm-hmm. Occasionally it'll blow up. Well, our sun is actually in an orbit that carries it out below the galactic plane from Sirius. But we're back in the galactic plane, and we're heading back towards Sirius right now. We entered the galactic plane, lined up with it in 2012. That's what all that hoopla was about. Mm-hmm. And it didn't affect us, apparently. But there are things out there in space that could kill us, but we just can't worry about it, I guess. And then we already may be even dead. We don't know yet, you know. Mm-hmm. Everything is sort of hologram. We've got Sirius B is right at what they call a Chandrasekhar limit. It can go into a neutron star at 1.5 solar masses, and it is 1.5 solar masses. Cool. And it could feed off from Sirius A, because it orbits around Sirius A every 54 years, and it's in this elliptical orbit. It goes 8 to 12 AU. It gets into 8 AU, and 1 AU is 1 astronomical unit, or 1 Earth distance of 93 million miles. But so it's 8 AU, and it's 1.5 solar masses, and it could feed off from Sirius A, which is 2 solar masses, and could go neutron, and it could wipe out star systems out to about 60 light years. And we're only 8 light years away, you know, so when they go bad. I mean, they really blow up.
Right. And when would that happen in theory? I mean, what kind of timeline would we be looking at for that?
Well, it may never blow while we're alive, and who knows, it just may never. It may not be feeding off from Sirius A. I don't know how much atmosphere it can absorb off from Sirius A, and neither one of those stars appear to be from this galaxy. They're not of the same elements as their sun. They have a titanium atmosphere in Sirius A, and then Sirius B is made out of subatomic particles, being a white dwarf, it's protons, and it gives off lots and lots of UV, ultraviolet light, above the range of human sight, so it's very hard to photograph it.
Right.
Amateurs are getting good photographs of it using digital cameras in a single lens. Every time you put up multiple lenses, it filters out the ultraviolet light, so this makes it impossible to photograph. I have one photograph in the book. It was taken by the Palomar Observatory quite some time ago.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, you got Betelgeuse over there about 1,000 light years away, and it's 800 solar masses. It could go into a white dwarf or a neutron star. We have no idea, and we don't know when. And, it could be bad for us here on Earth. Earth is a strange place. We probably had 4 or 5 other civilizations that developed high technology and had intelligence on it prior to our own. And it was much thicker and richer in ancient times. We had a much richer oxygen atmosphere. Exactly. During the time of Moses, it might have been as much as a 30% oxygen atmosphere. The sun could very well ignite a burning bush,
Right. Well, that would explain also the larger people, giants, or the theory of giants, right? A richer atmosphere.
I didn't hear that very well.
No, that's okay. Wouldn't a richer atmosphere create larger people, like giants?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, there's some Japanese fellows that are growing tomatoes 30 feet high in a hyperbaric chamber, a big tank on vertical, and they live many times longer. In several years, they're getting tons of tomatoes off of one plant. And they're using 2 oxygen atmospheres. They're, 28, 30 pounds per square inch instead of 14. And there's a lot of experiments that have been going on like that. We know that Earth had a high-pressure atmosphere during the dinosaurs because they took plaster casts of the dinosaur chest cavities about 6 years ago, and there's no way they could have lived in our rarefied atmosphere of 14 pounds per square inch because their lungs are only half as big to keep that animal alive in our present atmosphere. And then they also measured the size of their nostrils for breathing, and they were small compared with the necessary breathing apparatus in today's atmosphere for the size and mass of the animal. And they're also looking at fossilized raindrops in Washington area, and they're smaller because the raindrops fell at a slower rate to the thicker atmosphere. So this science is ongoing all the time on this, and I'm just learning and digging around myself, just trying to figure things out.
Right.
And I wish other people would do this, but anyway, somebody's got to do it.
Absolutely. I appreciate
That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, that's great. I hope more people read it as well. There's a lot of data in there. That's a lot of information you've been researching, and I'm quite amazed with it. And also, you made a mention of the moon that actually came into our orbit around Earth around 11,000 years ago. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, even after I wrote the book, just last year, Atlantis Rising magazine had an article by our geologist there that dated the Sphinx, and he had traveled to Pumapuco and Tiwanaku in South America there, and he'd mentioned 2 Germans that had written different books on a late arrival of the moon in 1910, and even prior to that time, these guys had read their ancient calendars and ancient records apparently, and even in American Indian legend, says there was a much brighter moon in ancient times. And then I came across Velikovsky's information. Anybody can look this up on the web, too. I believe the book is still there. It's only about 100 pages. It's really, really interesting. Emanuel Velikovsky could read ancient Sumerian, and he knew 7 languages. He could read and write in 7 languages. He was not a dummy. This guy was a real scientist. He wrote several books, The Earth in Upheaval.
Right. And Henry, Henry, hang on there just for a second. We're going to go for a break. We'll be right back, everybody. Stay tuned with Henry Kroll. We'll continue.